basically, this seems to be the biggest development in artificial intelligence since the release of ChatGPT back in 2022. And fundamentally speaking, the reason it's such a major release, it's such a major development, is because this is taking AI from a nice tool to use in your business and something that can increase the efficiency throughout what you're working on within your real estate business to somebody who's actually going to start replacing human beings within organizations and is becoming a true agentic AI assistant. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me in this episode is TJ Burns of Burns Capital Partners. TJ is a longtime friend and business partner of mine, somebody who has been both an LP in some of the deals that we've done at Aligned Real Estate Partners and has evolved over the years into somebody that I've joint venture deals with and co-sponsored deals with. And right now we are actually co-sponsoring the New Hampshire Multifamily Fund 3 together. So somebody that I've done a whole bunch of business with, great guy. And the reason I wanted to have him on this episode is to talk about what's going on throughout the AI landscape, but specifically as it relates to folks who are real estate investors who are working in the real estate business. And even more specifically than that, the reason that I wanted to have him on and get, this episode recorded and released quickly is to discuss the recent release of OpenClaw, which is, it seems to be, again, I'm speaking as someone who is a little less educated in this space than TJ is, and you'll hear him dive right into this. And throughout the episode, we chat about how big of a release this is. But basically, this seems to be the biggest development in artificial intelligence since the release of ChatGPT back in 2022. And fundamentally speaking, the reason it's such a major release, it's such a major development, is because this is taking AI from a nice tool to use in your business and something that can increase the efficiency throughout what you're working on within your real estate business to somebody who's actually going to start replacing human beings within organizations and is becoming a true agentic AI assistant. Now, I'm new to all this stuff. Like, I'm somebody who uses AI at a very rudimentary level, but is continuing to grow in how we use it within our business, specifically with Claude, specifically with some very simple AI automation tools, which I get into in this episode. We use some AI adjacent and related tools within our property management company at different levels, both some voice and conversational AI tools within the leasing department of our property management company, and then we're using it to expedite some other workflows as well. But fundamentally speaking, the release of OpenClaw is kind of a pivotal moment in the development of AI as it relates to being somebody or being something that can replace somebody in a business. And we get into that in this episode. So even if you're not somebody who is, interested in this right now, or somebody who is ready to try to adopt some highly technical AI product or use, it's important to stay up to date in regards to what's going on so that you can be ahead of the curve when some of these tools are released that are a little bit more user friendly. So we get into that in this episode, and we also spend some time talking about how the LP and passive investing landscape and appetites have changed over the last couple of years. TJ sits in a position within the real estate business where he's working with a lot of LPs who are investing in a handful of different offerings that Burns Capital Partners provides. And it's always great to get his perspective on that as well. So, long-winded intro, stick around, give this one a listen. Your mind might be blown. And if you feel like you took something away from this and learned something, please leave the podcast a rating and review, as it helps the show get noticed by more folks. Again, a reminder to everybody that the New Hampshire Multifamily Fund 3 closes permanently to new capital on March 1st. We're in the middle of raising the final round of funding. We recently recorded the webinar, and the webinar recording is available. So I'll be linking to that in the show notes, as well as a deal room. And if you want to learn more about the New Hampshire Multifamily Fund 3, click either of those links and we'll share some more info. But thanks again for listening as always, and let's get to this episode with TJ Burns. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Joining me, I believe for the third time, is Mr. TJ Burns, Burns Capital Partners. Interesting backstory, interesting story of how we know each other, which I think has been told on the podcast, the first couple episodes, first few maybe, as well as on LinkedIn and a whole bunch of other mediums. But our paths crossed in a unique way a few years back. Fun story about a wallet, which we won't get into, but it's one of the more memorable ones, I think, for folks who have heard it. But if you haven't, go back and listen to the first couple episodes, which I'll link to in the show notes. but a business partner of mine, a friend, someone who I've done a lot of deals with and worked with together for a number of years now. But for those that maybe didn't listen to the first couple of episodes, TJ, why don't you give everybody a quick refresh on your story and how you ended up working in the real estate biz here?
Yeah, thanks, man. Good to be here. I was looking back. I think we've raised about 20 million together on the deals we've done so far, which is pretty
It's a
pretty
healthy chunk.
incredible given where we started, right? So real quick, the blitz round, I found your wallet. You were building a business in real estate. I wanted to be building a business in real estate. I became one of your first LPs. We did some deals that way. They went well. I branched out, did a number of deals with other people. Realized I wanted to be more full-time in real estate. Started to co-GP deals with you, did some fund of funds deals with other groups, and then kind of brought it full circle and realized that I wanted to be more involved and really only GP. So now you and I have a fund. We, along your group, I buy multifamily in New Hampshire, and then we are a direct private lender. So we lend capital to fix and flip investors, have originated about $10 million there, have raised about 15 to 20-ish total from retail LPs and backgrounds in tech. So very focused on all the AI stuff going on, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I think background in tech is like shortchanging your actual background in tech. Long stint in Amazon, some high profile roles. I mean, you could describe your role in Blink a little bit better than I could, of course. But because of that background, I think, that's probably led you to be a little bit more technically comfortable. Would you fair that, or would you say that's fair to say as it relates to adopting AI tools, which is a very broad categorization that I'm sure we'll dive into. But I would say, like, your background certainly lends you to having a little bit more of a comfort with everything that's happening right now from an AI tool standpoint. Would you agree?
My most comfortable spot is you lock me in a room with a computer and you don't bother me and you just let me tinker on things. So everything that's happening with AI is right up my alley. And I've been an early adopter of all of the latest things as the adoption curve has gone. So ChatGPT downloaded on the first day when OpenAI released Operator, which was the first time that the agent was using its own browser and was moving the mouse. I was running that on day one. Got involved with N8N and Zapier, all these tools that are multi-step workflows. And then recently OpenClaw came out and I couldn't sleep for a week because I was very deep into it.
Well, that's
Um,
the perfect segue because that's where I want to start. So we're recording on the 10th of February here, and this is going to go up, not long after that. A few days from now is when I believe most people are going to be listening to this. And as somebody who is not nearly as technologically proficient as somebody like yourself, and is a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a late adopter, but somebody who's been like dragged into the world of adopting AI tools within our business, more heavily adopting LLMs to process some of the work that we do on a regular basis, kind of forcing myself to be somebody who is using Claudes and ChatGPT and some very basic kind of AI workflow tools like Relay.app and some of these other tools that are much more simplistic and kind of drag and drop in nature. I've seen all the news as it relates to the release of OpenClaw. I have a general sense of what this platform does just based on I'm refreshing my Twitter feed and I listened to a podcast episode or two. You know, clearly this is kind of I want to say like how do I best describe this? I think clearly it seems that it's the most hyped or discussed AI related piece of news or release, company release, product release, etc. Probably since like ChatGPT was released and everybody was kind of going nuts a few years back in 2022. In terms of it seems that this is the first like true AI agent solution that actually is, for lack of a better way to put it, like a human replacement for certain functionalities within a business versus kind of a supplement of what people are already working on. So I just kind of want to let you run with how you're using it. But first, let's talk about this at like a fifth grade level, kind of at a really high level, because a lot of the folks who are listening to this are obviously not as technologically proficient as you may be, or other folks who have spent a lot more time using these tools or a lot more time using these tools.
yeah,
What is the difference between a ChatGPT, a Claude, right, an LLM as the terminology that we're familiar with, and something like an OpenClaw, right? And put it another way, AI agent, that's a term that gets used very liberally, I think, in terms of
yeah.
it describes a lot of different things. Like, what is that in terms of how to think about it as it relates to the context of how you work in your business? And why is this such a kind of an important release in terms of speaking about OpenClaw?
Yeah, starting with the end, I do think this is the start of the human replacements. And I know people are scared about that. There'll be more work for humans to do, I'm sure. But this is the first time that I've felt like we're now starting to get into the realm where the early adopters can actually build something that can replace the people that work on computers. And then you take that to the nth degree, and all of a sudden we're creating physical robot bodies for these AIs, and now they're gonna be out in the physical world too. But to compare it to ChatGPT, I would say ChatGPT is more the recipe book. So that is the tool that anybody can use to go and figure out how to do the thing. But you still have to do the thing. You can't replace yourself there. You still have to, you're the one that goes and clicks the buttons, and you're also reasoning as you do things. You're just using that as the recipe book, as the guide. And then over the last couple of years, tools like Zapier, N8N, Make.com, these are like more of the multi-step like assembly process, or like the robot chef, where the robot chef has a pre-programmed recipe and he's also actually like plugged into the apps. Like maybe it's plugged into your email, maybe it's plugged into your to-do list. We've plugged it into things like underwriting, and it's talking to all these different apps and doing a little bit of reasoning along the way. But it's still very linear. It's still following like one recipe process. And it's really cool, but it's kind of like meh, because in the real world, there's so much decision making that has to happen every second, every hour, that humans do. We don't even realize we do it, but that's what happens. And OpenClaw, now this is when you give an AI a computer. So you give it its own computer, it has its own browser, it might even have its own accounts, it might have its own Gmail, its own Todoist account for a to-do list. Maybe it has its own Twitter or social media. These are all things people are doing. And you just let it go. And now it can finally autonomously do things for you without you having to inject yourself into whatever that's going on.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to kind of mentally frame the different roles that all of these tools have, right? Because I think that is kind of step one in understanding how somebody were to utilize this within their business is just fundamentally understanding the seats, or I should say, the actual problem that each tool is solving or what their actual role is in general, right? And for me, I think the kind of analogy that unlocked why OpenClaw is such a massive release is when we were, on an asset management call the other day, and you're describing it almost as like think about it as a person that you're giving access to different tools, or that you're providing access to different tools, right? Like if you were to hire like an executive assistant, you give them access to, read-only access to, call it your Notion board or your Monday.com or your property management software. Maybe you're setting them up with their own email address and you're forwarding over emails that have, instruction like tasks and saying, hey, can you please work on this and do X, Y, and Z? Maybe they have access to Canva and they're creating graphics for you or whatever. And this is a person who is an individual on your org chart. They have their own email. They have maybe their own phone number, as you described. Maybe they have their own like, social media accounts or something like that. You're creating, a separate email for them. They have their own computer. And thinking about the role of an open clause that relates to this is the person that you're delegating the work to, and then that person then reaches down into the different tools or resources that they have to in order to execute the work that you're delegating to them, which is what an assistant would do. And that's, as you described, like that's where the human replacement piece of this comes in. And that's where it gets a little spooky, is because that is more of a human replacement than, you know, we go on Claude to go and analyze a financial statement, and it does a really good job, and it saves us a lot of time, and it does a good job, a better job than a person would do. But you have to go and ask it to do that, and then you got to go review its work, and then you got to go take that work, and then you got to go and send it somewhere else, and you got to go and do stuff with it. Um,
Yeah.
Now, next step after that is like, all right, that's really cool, but like in practice, what does that actually look like? And I think that's where the technical dummies probably start to get into a little bit of a wall is, own computer, like, access to all this different stuff. Take it from there in terms of like how, what the implementation kind of looks like from a technical standpoint beyond that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's not worth it right now for most people to set this up. So OpenClaw is open source software, which means that it's literally just code that you download off of GitHub. You run it on your machine. It loads all of the functions that that you need to run it, and and then it's up to you. There's no centralized company that is making sure it's secure for you, that's updating it as new releases are shipped, that's solving the bugs for you. So when you download it and you start running it, you become it becomes like your own little software company, and you're responsible for that 100%, right? So that's why people have been saying online this is dangerous because you're giving it AI, which is reasonably smart, but also not reasoning like a human yet. You're giving it a computer, and then you're giving it access to documents or information that might be sensitive. And if you're doing that, don't do that. Make sure you're very careful with what you give it. What could go wrong, right? Like there's always to trick the AI. They talk about things like prompt injection. Imagine this, your AI has an email address and somebody emails it something that makes it give all your passwords away, right? It's stuff like that. So what I've learned with AI so far over the last 3 years, the tools they're progressing so quickly. Like every 3 months, there's something new where the old thing becomes obsolete. And you can build on top of OpenClaw. If you're really technical, that might be a good idea. You can certainly get it to do some small things for you. People are posting online about different functions it has, but the only people that are getting really a lot of use out of it are the really technical people, like far above what I'm capable of right now too. But for everybody else, there will be an enterprise solution that comes out for agents, right? Like I'm sure that's being worked on right now. Maybe by the end of the year, I'm sure Google's going to launch something. I'm sure, OpenAI, Anthropic, they're coming out with these agent products, and they'll do all the security stuff for you. They'll just charge you a subscription fee. So in that way, it's almost like a distraction for so many people. It's like you get this FOMO feeling where you should be working on this, but in reality, you should just focus on your business and just wait for somebody to keep developing the tools. Similar to like Claude Cowork, which was just launched. It's somewhat agentic. I haven't used it yet, but from my understanding, it's very user friendly and it's helpful for people. Whereas if they would have tried to do that 12 months ago, who knows if it would have worked for them.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head, right? And if we go back to like the analogy of it replacing an individual, like if you give somebody access to your Gmail in your Google Drive, and and then in the situation of OpenClaw, like as an analogy, you're giving them your actual computer with all the files that are saved on your actual desktop or on your computer itself, and they can they have access to all that information. Obviously, things can go awry in that scenario, and then it's that risk is even more exacerbated with an AI standpoint, or from a as you mentioned, prompt injection standpoint, where OpenClaw doesn't necessarily maybe have the contextual understanding of it shouldn't be sharing information, X, Y, and Z as information with somebody that emails you, or you prompt incorrectly or code incorrectly in some capacity, and it tweets on your Twitter account that you gave it access to, and something happens, and even if they're not sharing sensitive information, they're emailing somebody through your, like there's all kinds of different things that can happen, and obviously I'm stumbling over the right way to describe it, but it seems as if the folks that are monkeying around with it are doing so on a separate, like a completely separate computer, right? I know Mac Mini seems to be like the tool that a lot of people are buying, or the computer, I should say, that a lot of people are buying, with completely segregated access to any of the important information and going from there. But as you described, like, and I would describe myself in this boat, I get the FOMO feeling of I want to learn more about this. Clearly, I'm on Twitter listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, and I'm like, this is what people are doing with this is completely ridiculous, and I can think of all the ways that I can use it. But then you spend a little time on it, and it's like you're hearing MCP and API integrations and MD, and it's like, all right, well now you're kind of losing me because I'm like, now I have to go and take computer science 101 to understand exactly what we're talking about. So I think that there are still things that folks can do, and this is where I'm starting to spend a little bit more of my time is trying to understand when this is a little bit more neatly packaged as a product for folks with less technical skills to download and to utilize, like what gets you ahead of the curve, right? And so the
Mhm.
question for you is, for the non-technical folks that are like, I want to keep a pulse on this, and the second that there is some release from an Anthropic or a ChatGPT or a Google or what have you, I want to have as much work done maybe behind the scenes as possible to get the most out of a tool like this What are some
Mhm.
things you recommend folks like that do to, to maybe kind of build around the edges if they're not fully adopting the product itself today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think having an operating manual for your roles defined is a big one, and that'll help you even today if you have employees. The difference between hiring somebody and putting an AI in a role is that the human can read the nuance of the role, right? You don't have to necessarily give them a very well spelled out, dense operating manual on here is everything you need to know. Start with these fundamentals. Like the way OpenClaw works is it has all these markdown files. It has like a sole document. That is the first thing it boots up, tells it who it is, what it's about. The first thing I did is I edited that document, said, "You love humans, you love me, you're very peaceful." It
Just in case.
Exactly. And then it has an identity file that tells it what its role is. It has a user file, tells it who I am, what my preferences are. It has a heartbeat file, which it tells it, every unit of time, go and do these things or check up these things or update your memory. And then it has tools. Those are all the different apps that you might have. Then it has agents as well. So these are like the different buckets of its functions. But it's not dissimilar to writing up an operating manual. And AI is very good at reading dense documents. So if you want to prepare for what things will be, start to really define what the roles are in your company. Have an operating manual for your marketing role or your content role or your operations role. And if the more specific you can make these, the better. Because right now, AI does not understand nuance. Like for instance, today I was working on OpenClaw. It has its own email address now, its own Gmail, and I was emailing it, trying to get it to email me back when I emailed it and to understand when it should email me back, when it shouldn't, what is spam, what is not. Humans understand these things, but the my bot emailed me back 100 times after I emailed it 3 times. It just doesn't get, that that's not appropriate, right? So I have to kind of hard code that in or figure out how to convey that. But yeah, I think that like organization is big. If you can organize what you're doing, what the roles are, how they're done, do it in a recipe format, that you'll be way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I think something that I'm trying to spend more time doing in our business is providing just more historical context on like who we are as a business, historical context on how I communicate personally. And, there is some like that's an even bigger thing that I'm trying to accomplish for myself specifically as somebody who sends marketing emails and who, produces content and who, has a lot of a lot of content that I can that I can put on a computer or upload to a drive or provide as context, whether it's all of the historical like marketing emails that I've sent out that I personally, drafted, all the podcast episodes, right, which is something you and I talked about in the past. A lot of the different transcriptions from sales calls or asset management calls that I've had with, are on the acquisition side or just on the asset management side, giving context as to how I think, make decisions, just all of this different context that will better enable an AI to maybe, for example, produce content or to think about making decisions through the lens that of which I make decisions. And, that's something that should, right now I put it in a Google Drive, but like I realize over time, like that information is probably going to be best stored in something that's a little bit more accessible to an OpenClaw or an AI agent, which I think Notion is probably, I think it looks like Notion's maybe the platform that is most easily integrated. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, or if there's a different, place
That
where that should
that's
go,
what I
but
use. My agent has its
yeah.
own Notion space now where it has been writing stuff there in its own format. But you're so right, context. If there's one word, it's context. And the more you build up, the more you can replace yourself in the digital world. Probably
Yeah.
even your avatar. I don't know if you've seen that, but there are companies working on creating a lookalike for video calls, right? So you have all the context of your podcast, you have the videos, you have the transcripts. We're probably not far off from you could just walk away and let it go record podcasts for you.
Yeah, I'm forgetting the tool or the company or the website that does this, but a gentleman who, I subscribe to his newsletter. He's kind of in the forefront of the property management industry. Peter Lohman, listeners of the podcast may recognize the name because he's been on a handful of times. But in his marketing email, Like he has what he calls like a Peter bot, like, and you can go into whatever platform hosts this, and it's populated with all of the podcasts that he's recorded, been a guest on, all of the marketing emails he's sent, all the blog posts he's written, etc. And you can be like, hey, hey Peter, what's your opinion on like how do you best scale your property management company from 200 units under management to 300? What are some of the important decisions you make? What should I think about software wise? And it goes and pulls from all of the different, contexts and kind of tees up an answer, which is pretty cool. I've played around with it and I'm like, that honestly would be interesting just internally. Like, if you're training an employee, it's like, hey, go ask the TJ bar to the Axel bot, like the question before you actually come to me and ask me personally. Because if it's got all this context, they may actually be able to provide an answer that is quick and easy versus, reaching out to me. But I think there's a lot of different use cases in that respect. But it seems the constant, whether you're using an LLM for a specific task or whether, we get down the road here and you're trying to adopt an AI agent of some kind, whether it's OpenClaw, another platform that may be released at some point in the future, historical context, data, references, deep instructions, deep SOPs, like that's the stuff that everyone should be spending time on now because that will without a doubt help. What's funny is that lives in parallel to like what we've done a lot in the past, which is work with, RTMs, remote team members, virtual assistants, where when somebody is not physically sitting in an office with you from a, a day-to-day workload standpoint, like you have to provide more thorough instructions, more thorough context. And that's kind of like the JV level of what we're talking about at the call it at the AI agent level, right? So table stakes is like, hire an individual to help you with this, and through the, whether it's a VA or whether you're hiring someone to help on the asset management side, the content side, whatever. And the process of training them and providing them with the context also just, kills two birds with one stone, which is great as well. Where do you recommend folks go to kind of maybe further develop the skills required to adopt a tool like an OpenClaw or just stay up to date with news as it relates to like what's happening in this field? I think a lot of real estate folks are just behind the eight ball because they're they're reading real estate related news.
Mhm.
But is there a place that you've gone to, that kind of keeps you up to date, or are you just so plugged in that you're already getting this anyways?
Like everybody else, I see it on social media first. That's where I saw OpenClaw, and then I go right to Gemini or whatever the AI mode on Google is, and I just start asking it questions like,
Hmm.
what is this? And then I just go down the rabbit hole. In terms of like, is there a central place to get the best AI news that is not just information overload? There are some newsletters, but they're information overload. Like I said, like it's just too much. Even for me, somebody who likes tech and loves to tinker, it's like impossible to keep up. So it's almost worth it to just like let the hype pass, kind of figure out where the puck's going a year from now, which in my mind, we're going to have intelligent agents with their own systems that can actually step into roles that are specific and specialized. Maybe you have a marketing agent and then you have an operations agent. That's absolutely coming down the pipeline. So if you just understand that and you ignore the near-term hype, even if I'm giving advice that I don't follow myself, I you'll hear when the tools are good enough, right? Like
Yeah.
you'll absolutely hear about it, just like everybody's heard about OpenClaw now, even though it was open source and there was no marketing behind it.
I have to ask because you've been tinkering with it. Have you found any use cases that like stick out where you're like, oof, wow, this is a big one. Maybe it's not perfect, but you're getting pretty close and it's taking a big chunk of work off your plate on a regular basis.
Well, I have it hooked up to Todoist now, which is the my to-do list of choice, and it's creating its own to-do lists. And the next step is to get it to work on the to-do list when I don't ask it to. So
Mm,
I have the list. I'm working on giving it context on the list and understanding when to ask me questions and when to just do things. And the next step is to just have it knock stuff off. It does have its own email address now. It's been able to set up accounts on its own. Like it set up its Todoist account on its own once I got it the email address. It can already do all the things that you'd expect from ChatGPT or N8N, so it can go and do the underwriting. It can read articles online and summarize them and answer questions. And you can drop in a YouTube link and it can summarize the video for you. So it's already very good at processing information. The next leap for me is the autonomy, which is no matter what X says or LinkedIn, that's the tough part. It's really hard to make these things autonomous and useful.
Yeah. Where do you think, like, I'm kind of asking you to look, I guess, into the future here a little bit, but assuming it starts to get a little bit better at, maybe working with more vague prompts, or, you continue to provide context and continues to build a memory, it continues to get a little bit better. Like, what are some of the early kind of slam dunk use cases that you see where you can kind of see it coming down the short term pipeline here? Maybe you've been working towards building this out, within the platform itself, that are like, yeah, with sooner than later, it's going to be helping me with X. That's going to be a real big lift.
Yeah, for our lending business, Zendro, I'm pretty confident it will be doing loan processing for us. We'll have to figure out the security aspect of separating all the sensitive stuff from the public stuff, but I think in the next couple of months we'll figure that out, where it has its email address, it sees loans come in, it shepherds the borrower along the process, keeps us updated. I think SDR roles it's useful for. So you can plug these things into your CRM or have it make its own. We use Pipedrive. It can plug into Pipedrive and keep really good tabs on who we're trying to market to. It can do those follow-ups for you via email. You could even give it a phone number and a voice, and you could have it call people. That's all possible right now. I think the biggest advancements, since OpenClaw is open source, meaning it's kind of just like the glue that holds all the apps together.
Hmm.
And the most important app is the AI that you plug into it. Now, most people, when they start with OpenClaw, they start with maybe the easiest one, which is an OpenAI product like ChatGPT. And they realize pretty quick that in order to have the brain power they need, it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So they burn through 20, $30 in the first day and they say, this isn't sustainable. What else can I use? And maybe they go over to Anthropic, slightly better models, but still kind of expensive. And then for me, I jumped over to an open source model. So I've been using the Kimi K 2.5 model, which I believe is out of Moonshot Labs, which is a Chinese company. And that's a model that you can actually run on your machine if you have a powerful machine to do it. Now I don't, but let's say you wanted to drop 10 grand on a Mac Studio Ultra, you could actually run this model. So it's whatever that looks like. I suppose it's code. Run it locally, and then you're not paying for the cost to use that model. You're just paying for electricity. And you can see where that's going. So right now we have a model that is really good. You can run it locally if you have the compute. A year from now, you're going to have better models run on smaller machines to the point where eventually everybody's going to have the best model run on their iPhone. And the cost of those models is going to be nothing. It's just going to be the electricity.
Hmm.
And I think that is where the biggest leap is going to be made. Because if you gave me a model today that was 3 times as smart as the one I have, and I could plug it into OpenClaw, I could get it to do a lot more things. And since it's connected to a computer, it could also just teach itself. You could let it loose. It could look at its files. It can go learn on the internet, watch YouTube videos, whatever, and then upgrade itself over time, same as any human does.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, so that's interesting, that comment though. So it seems like right now the constraint is the cost of leveraging the highest, or the models, I should say, with the most capability, and the computing power of the actual computer that it sits on. And soon, obviously, a whole sidetrack here, but like the capex spend for all of the largest companies is absolutely absurd in 2026 in terms of what Amazon's spending, Google's spending, all of these major AI companies are spending. And like that's the race, right? Is to drive down the cost of using all of these platforms so that they're more widely adopted and so more people can access them. It's cheaper, all that. But that's interesting. So it seems as if that right now you're describing that as more of the constraint right now than the actual capabilities of like the OpenClaw itself in terms of understanding what it needs to do.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a model smartness problem. And the models
Interesting.
are pretty smart, but they're not smart enough yet, in my opinion, or at least the ones that we have reasonable access to, they're not there yet.
It's funny, man. Like the more we talk about this, the more I'm like, I wish there was like some, some like, like nuts and bolts of AI, 101 course on like a Udemy or something for like $100, and it's like it defines terms, defines how they all interact with each other, and like gives you the baseline understanding of like when you open up the code from an OpenClaw and you're talking about all of these different source files and all of that, like fundamentally you understand why you're doing these things versus what you're supposed to do. I think that's like what seems to be the biggest gap between those who are adopting and those who aren't, is like, why are we doing all of these things and why is it set up this way versus tell me what I should put into it, because then if something changes, you don't have the contextual understanding of actually what's going on behind the scenes, which is an interesting problem to solve if you can get ahead of it and you can, train yourself up a little bit as somebody who maybe doesn't have a background in this. I think the last topic that I want to kind of touch on this front is, let's just say, obviously you're very familiar with what the days, the kind of the day-to-day responsibilities are from a multifamily investment standpoint for like the active folks, right? You spend most of your time on the capital side, but on the operational side, you see it because you're on the asset management calls and you're speaking with these investors on a very frequent basis. What would you say right now are like the most, let's assume that somebody's listening who like really doesn't even use maybe LLMs at a high level, right? Like they throw a lease into ChatGPT here and there and they're like, pull out all the lease terms, and compare it against the rent roll. Like they're doing basic stuff like that. Where would you say these folks should be thinking about their business in context to where they can optimize it more? This is OpenClaw side, right? We're just going into using Claude or ChatGPT or what have you, into where they can get the most out of those platforms right now. Because I think that's where you have spent so much of your time, is understanding how to get the most out of these platforms on a regular basis. And you probably have a mental model of, this happens in my business. I know that this type of task can be best optimized using a Claude, whatever platform may be the best. How do you think about that in your business, and what are some things that might come to mind for like the multifamily real estate investor who's listening to this as it relates to where they can maybe optimize their business a little bit more?
Yeah. To invert it, I would think first, what is something that AI can't do for me, even if it was infinitely smart? And that is make decisions on the business. I don't think we're hopefully ever going to get to that point. Well, we probably will. I don't want to get on a side thread, but we'll probably get to the point where some AIs have their own businesses, but there's always going to be a puppeteer that's a human that is making some high level business decision behind them. At least I think. So that is the stuff that is what the owner should be doing. And I know you've talked a lot about this on your podcast, saying, work on your business, not in your business, right? Like that is the mentality of it. But if you invert it and say, okay, well, I'll make the decisions. What's all the low level stuff that bogs me down that would be really nice to outsource? I think people know by now that any sort of data processing, AI is very helpful with that. You drop it a lease document, like you said, a legal document, you drop it a YouTube video, you drop it an article, you say, summarize this. You give it context. You say, I am a multifamily investor. I am the owner of this property and I am leasing this. Pick this apart, figure out some of the ways that this goes wrong for me. Writing emails, communication, it's very good for that, right? Everybody is using it for content. I think a lot of those things people are doing already. And 3 years ago that wasn't happening. So it's, as we move along the adoption curve, that's slowly happening. If you want to get a little bit fancier, it's good for like Relay app is something I know you've used, where we're starting to give it like recipes. So do this as a trigger, and then this happens. Maybe an example of that is if you have an inbound inquiry for a apartment that I'm trying to lease, send a reply. If this, then that, right? And that's the basis of software anyway. It's all, when this happens, do this. If that happens, do that. Research, it's very good for research, as people know. So are those things helpful, do you think? Like, I
I
guess
think
I'm
so.
okay.
Yeah, because I think so. I think the mental model, like the comment around kind of like the mental model is which you touched on, which is important, is like what can't it do, right? And working backwards from there in terms of like, you are the one who is going to make decisions, is going to levy your judgment as the business owner. An analogy that I heard on a podcast at some point recently is, AI is the architect who builds out the building plans for you, but like the architect's assistant that builds the business, or that develops the drawings and puts together the specs, but like somebody has to give it the rubber stamp of approval before it goes to the the town to get the building permit, right? And you are hypothetically, or I guess conceptually, the guy who's always rubber stamping what it does. And understanding what comes before that is helpful, you know. And I think the two quick tidbits as somebody who's like constantly behind on this stuff and trying to be less behind is Claude with the projects and the skills functionality, I think is like tactically speaking, where we've started to see a gap where it's like any recurring work in your business where you're analyzing data or where you're drafting content or where you are doing the same type of work over and over again, providing AI with memory and historical context is something that's been historically hard to do because when you use a Claude or a ChatGPT, each chat's a new chat, right? So like you're losing your context each time. Whereas like projects in Claude now, right, you can give it historical context by working within the same project over a long period of time. Like I think that's something that's been helpful, but Relay.app is for me, that's been like the table stakes JV version of it, of like understanding the most bare bones version of what an AI agent could be, right? Where it's like it works when you're not working. It works based on triggers. And the example that I use is like we created a new email address, like an aligned REP email address that we use purely with Relay.app. And, you know, we have some automations built out where it's like when you receive an email from Axel, analyze it. You know, if it's the address of a deal that we're underwriting, go through this workflow of look up some rent comps, look up, kind of give us a summary on the neighborhood. If it's got this information in it, you know, do this. Maybe it's a YouTube video where you're going to summarize it, for example, and like it's based on triggers where then you're triggering the use of a model to analyze what type of task you're asking it to do. And then based on its judgment, then it, you know, a few different things happen. And it's like, is this a game changer? No. Like, you know, I think that there's a lot of hype online as you've described. Like, is any of this stuff changing, completely changing how you go about your business now? No, it really isn't. But it's saving you a few hours here, a few hours there. And I think for us, it's like, yeah, maybe it's not completely changing our business using something like a Relay.app, but it's interesting as a tool to tinker with, and it slowly expands your understanding of what can be done. And I think that's so much of like what I'm trying to do personally is like just try to expose myself a little bit more to what is being done so that I'm reframing kind of my own expectation of what can happen in the future. Because I think that's where, you know, some people are going to start to find their edge, which is like what you're doing, it seems like with using OpenClaw right now. Like you're expanding your own viewpoint of like what can happen and it's kind of changing how you may approach the business in the short term, knowing that, you know, you're tinkering around and these different things are possible, even if it's not changing your business right now.
Yeah, I just asked it quick what's the coolest thing it can do, and it said make N8N workflows. So that's something that I've been doing for a couple of years now.
Hmm.
It can just build those for me. So like, we have a couple for Zendra. We have a rental rate calculator. We have an ARV calculator. These things are all plugged into different apps, and it goes out. It makes a nice report. It emails it to you. Now, I guess OpenClaw can make those for me. They probably won't be perfect, but maybe in a couple months it can make some really cool stuff on N8N, and then now it's like an app factory where it's just churning out apps for you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to think about it conceptually is like what are the repetitive aspects of my business? And for you guys with a lending business, right? It's like you get a loan request and it's 123 Main Street in Anytown, USA, and it's now we have to do underwriting of this loan, right? And that is a textbook good, you know, like that is the textbook use case for an LLM is like underwrite this deal, find us some sales comps, find us some rent comps, you know, based on what was inputted on this Google form or whatever, like assess the renovation budget. Is that in line? Is that not in line? And like that, you know, has historically been like a junior analyst and intern type of job. But like that stuff is like no human should be doing that right now. Like, and that's the first thing that we took off our plate when we started looking at deals. It's like when we're like, I haven't pulled rent comps in like a year and a half. Like that's like kind of table stakes. Like if you're a multifamily investor and you're still going on Zillow yourself and looking up rent comps, like that's a total waste of your time. Like that's a free ChatGPT based subscription role at this point, you know, with a good prompt. So, you know, a lot of that stuff can be automated when it comes in repetitively, happens on a frequent basis. And I think that's the right mindset to get in when you're thinking about how to use a lot of these tools, which opens up, you know, I think for the hardest part is like understanding when you should be like, okay, I'm doing this myself, but I could probably, you know, not be doing this myself. When like trying to train yourself to think in that manner. Which is almost the same thing as like hiring people and training yourself to delegate, as you keep doing the work yourself, even though I hired someone to help with it because you're used to doing it yourself. I think, there's a lot of parallels between the two.
Agreed. Yeah. And that's a good example too of you still needing to be involved in the process because you could have AI go pull the red comps, and we see this sometimes where it'll go pull comps and you need to add the context and say, well, that's actually not a very good comp, or all these comps are not very good comps. And the reason is because this unit has a washer dryer, or the layout's different, or the vintage is different. Things like that, AI loses all the time.
Yeah. And it seems like that's what OpenClaw might be improving upon his based on what's been done historically is like you make a comment like that and it trains itself over time to more closely align with your expectations of what you're asking it to do, which is certainly helpful. Any closing thoughts on this whole topic? I guess before we wrap up, I know it's a broad one, but I know you have some thoughts as to like where, this stuff's going. You kind of mentioned like we're quickly marching towards a world in which this starts to replace individuals in a pretty real capacity, but anything else that we should have touched on that we didn't?
I mean, to sum it up, my one, this stuff's coming down the pipeline and the world's going to look much different 2 years from now. Two, don't get distracted by open source stuff if you're not super technical. Try to rely on the apps that have been proven. And three, like you said, continue to build context for your business. That way you can hand this stuff off when the time's right.
Yeah. All right, last thing before we go, current events. You're obviously chatting with a bunch of LPs on a regular basis. You've got multiple offerings, in terms of what we're doing on the fund side for small to mid-sized multifamily properties throughout New Hampshire. You've got Zendra on the lending side. And, historically, you've been involved in some other asset classes as well, short-term rentals. You've been involved in a different debt fund as well outside of Zendra in the past. Do you have a sense right now of what LPs, what they're looking for is very vague because every LP has a different risk profile. But maybe how have you seen the, call it the market evolve from a capital raising standpoint over the last few years since you've been in it and raising capital? If there's a couple kind of high level bullet points that stick out as it relates to what you're hearing from investors and what that's dictated as it relates to where you're recommending investors place money.
Yeah, I would say it's gotten a lot more crowded. And you and I have talked about this where we're we're heading from information being inefficient to information being more readily available to everybody, right? And if you look back 20 years on private placements, they were very much behind closed doors, a good old boys club of handshakes where they weren't accessible, right? And then you had all sorts of companies launched to democratize these types of offerings, but they're also a lot of those are they have their own problems, right? Maybe they're available, but there's there won't get into that. But with what we do specifically, so private placements for some niche in real estate, raising for multifamily, whatnot, it's still very crowded now. Like it seems like there's a lot of people out there raising money, executing on strategies. There are platforms popping up where you can find sponsors, you can find deals and get deal flow. And I think what's been working a lot for me is transparency. So I'm pretty big with trying to get like reviews from LPs, have those posted publicly and to be verified, putting all my LPs into a group where they can talk with one another and they can see what's going on across all the deals that I'm doing. Maybe another word for it is authenticity. And perhaps that's what I was referring to with the democratization. Those platforms are nice for access, but there's no personal accountability. There's no one person you speak with. It's a corporation, right? Whereas what we do, we're the principals of the fund. We're the ones that make the decisions and answer the questions. And we're accessible. If you're an investor, you get our cell phone numbers and you can call us anytime. And that's kind of what I've been relying on. And I found to work is just being just building that relationship with LPs. And maybe that plays into the uniqueness of what we're doing and what everybody's doing. There's only one Aligned Real Estate Partners. There's one Burns Capital Partners, maybe not in name, but at least in like my org. And I try to find people that resonate with my story. A lot of my investors are tech people. I work in engineering. That was my background. And a lot are looking for diversification, right? So, and a lot are also there's so much information. Everybody has information overload these days. You go on the web and you just get hit with 1,000 different things, OpenClaw and current events and your Twitter feed. People don't have the capacity to sift through like what's signal and what's noise. And what I get a lot is people that just get to know me and they see the stuff I'm doing on the real estate side. They see that I'm competent. We build some sort of trust, and that's enough.
Hmm. Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, the objective that folks have of outsourcing their decision making in a lot of respects, like that's not going to change. It's somebody who isn't in a particular industry and wants to participate in a particular industry is always going to rely upon somebody's opinion who's in that industry, whether it's like that's why financial advisors have a job. That's why folks who are raising capital to fund real estate, opportunities are going to have a job. That's why that's the fun that's attorneys, right? I mean, these are all of these different industry professionals are relied upon because of their expertise within a specific field, and real estate's no different, right? And I think that that isn't going to change anytime soon. Although maybe OpenClaw gets good enough here and can start making judgmental decisions in a handful of years. It's funny to think about where that might go, but in the short term, it's certainly not going anywhere, and that makes sense. And I think what you've done as it relates to becoming very transparent in terms of sharing investor testimonials is I think something that is a real clear separator amongst what other sponsors are doing now, or I should say what many other sponsors are doing, which is trying to restrict transparency and trying to make their current portfolio past deals more opaque, more harder to access from an information standpoint, and being a little bit more transparent and more of an open book with that, I think is a huge step forward in what over the last few years has been an industry that's taken its lumps. So I think that's big. And I think for the sponsors out there who are listening to this, like not even the LPs, but the active folks that are trying to raise capital and put together deals, like the more transparent you can be, even if you feel that you're sharing information that doesn't quote unquote help sell your deal or your business to an investor, the better it is. Because fundamentally, I think many LPs really, really seek authenticity in the folks they invest with. They really seek transparency. They really want to understand where their money's going, what your business looks like, all of these different things, because the industry is a little gun shy right now. So I think that's a great closing comment. Where can folks learn more about you and connect with you?
You can go to burnscapital.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, TJ Burns. You can email me, tj at burnscapital.com.
Awesome. Love it, man. Appreciate the time. This has been great.
Thanks for having me, man.